How are you going? This is a Sleepy Koala, and I'll be showing you how to use colliders in Unity2D. Be sure to pause the video while following to not miss out on key information. The link to the assets used within this tutorial is within the description down below. Now, it goes without saying that you can know if a collider is meant for 2D objects by checking that the collider itself has a name ending in 2D. This means that when it comes to Unity2D, it was intended that you use these colliders for your 2D objects, aka sprites. This intention also lets us know that we shouldn't attempt using 3D colliders in our 2D world, especially if you are a beginner. With that said, let's move on by first understanding the definition of Collider2D in the Unity context. Collider2D is the parent class from which all Collider2D components are derived. It's also what defines the shape of a 2D game object for physical collisions. This means that it doesn't matter what the 2D game object looks like, how tall or wide it may be. You as a developer can control how the physics engine will perceive the 2D game object. There are 7 types of colliders created for Unity2D, all of which were created to be used for certain shapes. I'll go through them quickly and let you know their purpose. Box Collider2D, it's used for square and rectangular collision areas. Capsule Collider2D, it's used for circular or oval shaped collision areas. Circle Collider2D, used for circular collision areas. Composite Collider2D, it's used to merge both box and polygon colliders. The Edge Collider is used for freeform collision areas that aren't encased, so a flat platform, if you will. Polygon Collider2D, it's also used for freeform collision areas, but they are encased, so it's taken as a solid object, if you will. And finally, we have the Tilemap Collider2D, which is used for tile collision areas. Just note that the box and circle colliders are the more performant colliders, with them both being primitive types, meaning they are simple for the CPU to process. There are 6 methods that can be used for Collider2D functionality, starting with the collision methods. You have onCollisionEnter2D, onCollisionStay2D, and onCollisionExit2D. These 3 methods use the collision2D parameter and only occur when colliders, well, collide. Next up, we have the trigger methods, with them being much like the collision methods: onTriggerEnter2D, onTriggerStay2D, and onTriggerExit2D. These 3 methods use the Collider2D parameter, so don't get it mixed up with the collision2D parameter. And they only occur when one of the Collider2Ds that have a rigid body 2D enter a collider that has had its isTrigger boolean set to true. Just honestly looking at the methods, you can tell that due to their naming, they're all pretty self-evident. Alright, moving on to the 2D colliders. As you can see, I've set up a demo level using Unity tile maps and a tile set from itch.io. The artist's name is Kilisa. I highly recommend you check them out. They do some great work. Now I'm going to select the orange fire in the hierarchy and scroll down in the vector. And you're going to see that I have attached a box Collider2D to it. This is because it actually shows, but if you press Edit Collider, you'll see that the box collider actually fits perfectly around the sprite. It wasn't always so. The actual sprite actually has a transparent background around it. And what it does is, when you first add a box Collider2D, I'll just add another one, you'll find that it actually automatically goes around the entire sprite. So you would have to either, once again, pressing Edit Collider, you would either have to manually adjust the size using your cursor, or you could set it up with offset and size, which we'll get into. Right, I'm gonna go ahead and delete components and go over the various properties. Right, starting with the 4 main properties, see across all 2D colliders, is the material. This determines the friction and or bounciness the collider will have using a physics material 2D. Next is trigger. When set to true, it allows other colliders to pass through it, which allows trigger methods to be used. The fire sprite has a script called onTriggerCook, which uses the onTriggerStay2D method. Handy. And next is useByEffector. For this video, we're not going to worry about this. I'll cover it hopefully in another video, because there's a lot to go in. And we have offset, which is also used by all the colliders, and it allows you to move the starting point of the collider. So generally it would start from the center of the sprite, change it and suit our needs however we want. Next, the properties that are shared by many, but not all colliders. First up is used by Composite. I'll explain this actually a bit later in the video. It's got its own thing to it. Works. Then we have size. It basically talks for itself, honestly. And then we have edge radius, which is used to make rounded corners. The box collider's case, if you have like platforms and whatnot, platform needs a rounded corner. You don't want like a straight, you want sharp edges. And then we have the box collider's unique property, which is auto tiling, which when set to true, and provided the sprite's render draw mode is set to tiled, it allows for automatic updates whenever you adjust the dimensions of the sprite, which is kind of handy, honestly. But yeah, that pretty much sums up box colliders, if anything. So let's talk about the Circle Collider2D. The Circle Collider2D is it's mainly used for some round-looking objects like wheels or the snail. That said, I'm actually going to go ahead and click the snail in the hierarchy. And if we look at the Circle Collider2D component within the inspector, you can see that aside from the 4 main properties, the Circle Collider2D has a unique property called radius, which, acting much like the sprite property, controls the radius of the Circle Collider. Yep, as usual, it's pretty self-evident. You may have noticed that the snail has a rigid body 2D component. It's because if we press play quickly, waiting for it to load. When I move the snail onto the fire, it shows that it's being harmed. The reason being, since, as I said earlier, you require a collider to have a rigid body 2D component, which is the snail in this case, so that when it comes in contact with the collider, which being the fire, that has had its trigger boolean set to true, it's going to go ahead and cause the on-trigger cook, and the method within it, on-trigger stay 2D, to be called. Next, we have the Capsule Collider2D. It's sort of like a box and circle collider mixed. Just going to go ahead and add it in quickly. It has two properties that define it. One being size property, talked about, and the next is the direction property. Now, the direction property decides if the collider is either vertical or horizontal. So I'm going to go ahead and actually increase it. See, it's like a hill. Can't do this with the circle collider. Can make the capsule collider a circle collider in a way, but it's not going to be the same. Yeah, so if we set the direction from vertical horizontal, you'll see that we can no longer stretch this vertical properly. It's going to be a circle, but we can spread it out like so. It's always going to be like a sort of oval shape, a pill shape case. Going back to vertical, goes back to circle. Stretch it out that way, which is pretty useful in certain cases. Majority of the time you'll see Capsule Collider2D being used on player sprites because it is actually really useful when dealing with corners or sharp edges. Also, do note that the Capsule Collider2D is considered solid, meaning can't share its collision area with other colliders. So if you would say the put boxes, you know, I don't know, player sprite, you know, egg, a capsule collider around it, Capsule Collider2D will actually push out all of those colliders. So yeah, careful positioning things, colliders, especially when it comes to the Capsule Collider2D. So I'm going to go ahead and actually delete the Capsule Collider now. Not needed, and don't want to forget about it. Let's move on to the Polygon Collider2D. The Polygon Collider2D, it's a very useful collider in the sense that it allows you to fit the shape of any sprite using a bunch of line segments. Now I'm going to go ahead and add the snowflake sprite to the scene. And you'll notice that, zooming in, it has many curvy and straight edges. That being said, I'm going to add the Polygon Collider2D components, inspector to it. And you'll see that Unity has actually automatically determined the shape of the sprite and has created the collider accordingly. This is convenient as it helps cut down on development time, but if you need be, you can still manually edit the collider. As you can see with the previous colliders, you can manipulate the vertices of the collider position to however you want and change its size accordingly. But as this is the Polygon Collider, you can basically add new vertices by by holding down shift and then dragging mouse. Like, creating as much as you want. You know, it certainly doesn't fit the sprite, but just for the sake of the tutorial. Or guide, if anything. And you can actually also, you know, you made all these vertices that you don't like them. So what you would do is you would either hold down Control, or I believe it's Command for Max, to be sure, and don't normally use Max. So holding down Control, you can left click a vertex to remove it. And why aren't you moving that? There we go. So you can just Control left click it, and they all just go away. Goodbye. Unneeded stuff. Right. You can at any point check the positions of the vertices by looking at the points property. Over here. Go to paths. So this basically shows you, you know, how everything is located, where everything's situated. I wouldn't recommend customly, you know, coming in here and just manually like playing with these values. That's not what it's for. I guess if you're fine tuning, you know, a certain edge for whatever reason, you could come in here, but you know, in small increments. Change it like slightly, something that you can't normally do properly with a mouse. You do also have to note that the Polygon Collider2D, it's always got to be an encased area to function. So it's always got to be sealed, basically. Right, just zipped over here. Continuing on with the Edge Collider2D, the sister collider of the Polygon Collider2D, if you will. Just like the Polygon Collider, it uses vertices, points, if you will, to control the shape of the collider. If we just go to edit, as you can see, we can move it around like so. But unlike the Polygon Collider2D, the actual endpoints, they don't need to meet, meaning you don't actually have to have an enclosed area for the Edge Collider2D to work as intended. It features a few different properties compared to the Polygon Collider2D. Starting with, it actually makes use of the edge radius. So if we go ahead and set it up, give it a 1, see how big it is, gets the collider. I guess it's 0.1. Makes it look a bit nicer. It's generally used for more bulky platforms that require rounded corners, if anything. So, it's a bit better than box colliders in a sense, where this is already like set up to be used for walkways and the such. It also allows you to set up adjacent starting points and end points. Personally, I haven't found any use for this sort of thing, but perhaps you may. While we're still editing the collider, just want to show you, unlike the Polygon Collider2D, you can click anywhere along the edge, create a new vertex. So, start making new points here and there. And, you can do this, of course, without holding shift. I'm trying to get at. It's actually really useful. And, yeah. And press Control. It's normal. Or you can use Command on a Mac. The Edge Collider2D is generally used to create platforms, floors, and walls. You can also use it to walk on air, just clicking play quickly. And you can see my snail has started walking on air. Let's see, going back to scene and labeling air walk, slippery. You can use the slippery slope, because the edge collider actually has a slippery material in it. Materials. See, that's got no bounciness or friction. I'll go more into this in another video, but for now, let's get back to. And I'm going to actually enable this dynamic sprite, which is circular. And so when we press play, you'll see that it actually rolls down the slope, which is an edge collider. So that's pretty cool. No honesty though, as much as it is cool to use the edge collider, I seldom touch it, as you find you don't get many cases that justify using it, as just using tile maps is easier. Speaking of tile maps, and zipping out of the scene a bit more, the entire scene was built using tile maps. More importantly, its use of the Tilemap Collider2D. Now, just clicking over to the ground layer, the Tilemap Collider is actually my favorite type of 2D collider, as all you need to do is just add it to the Tilemap game object, and you can just continue developing your scene. It's pretty simple, which I love. I remember that each tile of this collider will have its collider either being a box or polygon collider. This means when working on multiple tile maps, try not to overlap these colliders, because you may get unwanted behavior. This collider also has two unique properties, with the first being the map tile change count. This property is used to accumulate tile changes, which could be either adding or removing tiles from a tile map before it does a full collider rebuild of the tile map. The second is the extrusion factor. With the extrusion factor, the property basically, when used, all tiles within the tile map will extrude by a set amount. This allows us to minimize gaps between tile colliders. Let's direct our attention back to scene view. And just want to note that the two tile maps that are using the Tilemap Collider currently is platform that you see here. It's got its own tile map due to design reasons. One tile map's in front of the other tile map and such and such. So going to go ahead and it's mainly because the tile maps are just a place to be walked on currently, so I can't justify any of the other tile maps having their own collision or anything. Now we're left with Composite Collider2D, that's just full of merge box colliders and polygon colliders. This is because, unlike most colliders, the Composite Collider2D does not define an inherent shape, but instead uses the shapes of box and polygon colliders, merging them in the process. This merge also takes the vertices from all the incorporated colliders and merges them into new geometry that's controlled by the Composite Collider2D. Please note that the use by Composite Boolean, whether it be in a Tilemap Collider, Box Collider, Polygon Collider, it needs to be set to true, and it's got to be attached to the same 2D rigid body. That's on the same object as the Composite Collider2D or parent object. You will notice that you don't see a few of the usual properties. So if I just go ahead and set this to false, you see that the material is trigger and used by effector properties to come back. This is because when you press use by composite and set it to true, the Composite Collider2D actually takes control of these properties, which is honestly, in my opinion, pretty good management. So it allows you to set the same physics material, set up if it's the trigger. It doesn't have to be all individual anymore, which is pretty good. The Composite Collider2D has a few other different properties compared to the other colliders. It's quickly setting body type to dynamic and auto mass. It has the density property that can be tweaked to change mass calculations of the associated rigid body 2D. So, own it. Of course, it's only available to if you have enabled use auto mass. Just gonna set that back to static. Looking back, we have the next property being geometry type. This causes the Composite Collider2D to function like either an edge Collider2D if you're using outlines. You notice in the scene you can just see those border lines, or you can set it to polygons, which just like the name, it acts as a Polygon Collider2D. Also, going back to outlines, you'll notice that when you have outline selected, it gives you access to edge radius, which is pretty cool. Set for rounded edges, too big. So we just set 1. Now the snail can path properly without any hassle, without getting stuck on anything. Next is the generation type. Now, the generation type is the method used to control when the geometry of the collider is generated. This occurs when either the Composite Collider2D is changed, or if any of the colliders it is composing are changed. There are two types of two generation types. Sorry. One being synchronous, which causes Unity to generate new geometry immediately if a change has been made to the Composite Collider, or as we said, any colliders it's composing. The second type is manual. Looking at it only generates new geometry when you request it. As you can see, we have a regenerate collider button. Or of course, you can access the script API, but I would only recommend you do so. Know what you're doing. Lastly, we have vertex distance. And vertex distance, it just allows you to set a value for to control minimum spacing between all vertices, and if any of the vertices are closer than the limit that you've set, it gets removed. So set this to 1. Generates, as you can see, it's kind of fine-tuned the tile map a little bit, which actually makes it look much cleaner. So just going back, Control Z, generate. See, now it's gone back to no longer being that aligned. It's going around all these edges. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So yeah, it's a very strong property, if you ask me. Really help you out and save and perform, which is nice. In my personal opinion, I would always recommend use of Composite Collider2D, because it does mean that there are fewer individual Collider2D shapes that get involved in the physics updates. This means, because of that, there are fewer calculations required, which works for us because, as I said earlier, it helps the performance of our game. Also, though rarely used by most, when creating tile maps, you get the option to create custom physics shapes for each tile. It's pretty handy if you ask me, but just remember to set the collider type to sprite within the tile assets. And lastly, when using colliders for your ground collision, try to always use either an edge collider or composite collider, as there is an issue that affects the collider that's moving. Player, for instance, this issue could cause the player to suddenly slow down, or in some cases stop completely, which is really annoying. Do note, I've only covered simply the basics on colliders for Unity2D. Hopefully I'll cover the rest in the next video for this series, which will be on Unity2D. If not, after I end up doing effectors before I actually focus on a rigid body. Yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. And as always, I hope you liked it. If you want to see more tutorials, guides like this, be sure to like the video, comment if you have any questions, and subscribe to the channel. Take it easy, guys.